Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Going Mental. I'm your host, or actually just one of your hosts. We have two hosts here. I'm Paul Elam with a Voice for Men, and with me also is Dr. Tara Palmatier of shrinkformen.com. Dr. T, would you like to say hi to everybody?
Hi to everybody.
There it is. You all got your hello for the day. Well, here we are on the cusp, marching up toward Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is October here in the United States. And another way of saying it, it is Domestic Violence Disinformation Month. It is that month where the government and academia and social agencies and groups that administer services for at least half the victims of domestic violence get together and raise money and lie to you about the nature of domestic violence, and give you all kinds of phony numbers, and generally implying that women are mainly the only victims, and men are mainly the only perpetrators. The exact opposite or near opposite is the true. Domestic violence is generally gender symmetric by all valid research available, and the damage from domestic violence and all forms of abuse that fall into what we might call the violence spectrum doesn't know a sex. But the money is in female victims, the money's in female bruises, in female tears, so a gullible American public gets is female-oriented propaganda. And this particular October marks a new time in the history of domestic violence history. For the first time ever, we will have in the NFL feminist advisors on domestic violence during Domestic Violence Disinformation Month. Now, who could be better placed than that? We will have, I'm sure, some additional propaganda now sponsored and paid for by the NFL to paint all men as victims. You're going to see football players out there saying, man up. You're going to see coaches out there saying, a man never hits a woman under any circumstances. And what you're going to see is a further persecution of Ray Rice, who for defending himself has lost his job and his professional future. Dr. T, so how are we going to help educate people about the realities of domestic violence versus all the bullshit that they're fed by now everybody from Barack Obama to Roger Goodell?
Well, first I would like to add what you're not going to see from the three feminist domestic violence advisory panel for the NFL is them addressing the physical violence perpetrated by NFL wives.
No, but they would be women. That's not what the NFL is going to talk about, correct?
Well, of course not, because that doesn't fit the feminist narrative by which VAWA gets passed again and again, billions of dollars get funneled into domestic violence shelters, education programs, lots of things that don't even actually go to the domestic violence victims themselves. But first, let's start with the facts. Domestic violence is not a gender problem. It is not about female victims and male perpetrators. Okay? It is about generational transmission of using control, force, physical force, and intimidation to secure whatever it is the abuser wants. It is a learned behavior, and men and women perpetrate domestic violence at nearly equal rates, and the victims in both genders are nearly equal. So first things first, this is not a man beating up on woman problem. It occurs in both sexes, and both sexes offend at nearly equal rates.
I have a few questions I want to run by you, Dr. T, in the course of this. One, when we talk about this as a familial problem or a generational problem, this is something, one, that's not news. This Erin Pitsey was talking about this 40 years ago. She's one of the leading people that ever started doing real research on domestic violence, and her conclusion, which they drummed her out of her own country for, was that the women who were victims were often as violent as the men they were running from, that it was frequently a situation of mutual combat in a relationship, and that it was, in fact, a learned behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've got two ways that people learn from domestic violence, primarily. Some learn to just avoid it. I mean, I want to say possibly a few. But my experience is that people generally either learn violence as an instrument. If they witness it growing up, then they're likely to repeat it in their adult relationships, or they're likely to become a victim. They're likely to select somebody that will employ violence to be in a relationship with. Now, what do you think is the determining factor between which direction a person will go? Does it depend on which parent they identify with the most and therefore select in a future relationship? How does that work? What's the difference between somebody that grows up to beat people and somebody that grows up to be beaten?
That's a great question. Honestly, I don't know what makes the difference. Many of my clients, they have told me that their wives or girlfriends take after their fathers, who were the abusive ones, and they take after their mothers, who were the abusive, crazy parent in their family of origin. So I don't think it has anything to do with identifying necessarily with the same-sex parent. But that's a great question. I wish I knew. That would be very important information to have. But there do seem to be three pathways that people who grow up in dysfunctional, chaotic, abusive families of origin take, which are: one, the child grows up to identify with the aggressor. Meanwhile, still seeing the abusive parent as the abusive parent, and they don't believe they're abusive, they believe they're the victim in their current adult relationship. Meanwhile, they are treating their partner and often their children in the same ways that their abusive parent did. The second pathway is the individual grows up to be people-pleasing, rescuing, fixing, codependent doormat. And the third option seems to be the person neither becomes an abuser nor a people-pleaser, but they tend to be pretty relationship avoidant.
So if you don't get into the stimulus, you can't get into the problem.
Right.
Well, that makes sense, and I suppose it should be said too that in order to understand how people, which path they diverge on, whether it's going to be perpetrator or victim, you would actually have to do real research that's non-ideological, because that would involve the study of male victims, female perpetrators, across the board, everything. And since, of course, that's not going to happen, we're probably going to have a knowledge deficit on how people end up being abusers or perpetrators in the first place for a long time. This is one of the biggest problems when your agenda is ideology and not science and not research, is that you have to fit everything into your ideological mold. So the moment information comes along, or a research idea or a thesis emerges that might be investigated to find answers to problems, you either accept it or reject it summarily, based on your ideology. And it's why we end up having this dead end that we don't have answers in. Here's another question I wanted to run by you, just based on anecdotal evidence from my experience. And it's a pretty provocative area. My experience, though, in dealing with people in violent relationships was that in many cases, being a victim of violence was something that was instigated and used to gain control over the relationship, particularly with female victims of male violence, that there are, and I'm not saying this characterizes all victims, so nobody needs to go there, but there are women, and I have seen it happen time and time again, that will provoke and antagonize and abuse their partners to the point of explosive violence, and then they got it. Then he's in the corner, filled with shame, ready to do whatever he's told, feeling like crap about himself, and she's got that little smirk on her face, which is, I got you now.
That's right.
And that is a part of DV we don't talk about much, but I think it's very real. What say you?
It's absolutely very real. And look, it doesn't even have to be an act of physical violence of the man, losing control and responding in that way. Most of my clients, with one or two exceptions, they have not assaulted their wives when provoked. But what does happen is, over a course of weeks, days, hours, their wives or girlfriends will poke at the soft, vulnerable, sore spots, because they know they know what buttons to push. And finally, when they can't take it anymore, they'll be like, God, would you just shut up? Leave me alone. Shut the fuck up.
You have an anger problem.
What did you just say to me? How could you tell me to shut the fuck up? To shut my fucking mouth? Oh my, this is why I, and it gets in that moment, and it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be physical violence. It could just be, get the hell away from me and leave me alone, you nutbag. Which of course is not okay, but when somebody's needling you and poking at you, I mean, even the most loving puppy, if you kick it enough times, it's going to bare its teeth and snap at you, okay? But as soon as they get, it's what one of my clients calls the nugget, as soon as they get that nugget, which is you respond emotionally and in anger, the whole situation gets flipped around, and you're the abuser, and she's the poor little victim, and every time you get into a conflict or a disagreement, she's going to trot that incident out, even if it happened a decade ago, and everything that she's done doesn't exist because once upon a time, 10 years ago, you told her to shut the fuck up. They also do this. Many clients whose wives have essentially, withhold sex. There's no sex happening. They're in these affection-starved marriages, and you know what? They look elsewhere for affection. In fact, I've had clients whose wives have told them, if you want to have sex, go have sex. I'm not doing it. And when they finally do, then that infidelity is used as a weapon to use against them. I'm not saying infidelity is okay, and I think if they're in that kind of marriage, they should do the healthy, smart thing, which is get the hell out of it, and then go find a healthier marriage partner. But sometimes men don't, and then that becomes, yet another weapon. And then it becomes this, you need to re-earn my trust. And it becomes an excuse to demand passwords for emails and social media accounts and to basically live under 24-hour surveillance. And again, to have that brought up as the trump card in any kind of conflict or disagreement. So yes, there are absolutely women who will provoke and bait and push until the point where their partner snaps at them or, sorry to say, hits them, and then they've got a lever by which to abuse him further using shame and guilting tactics.
Yep, I've seen it before. As a matter of fact, I had a friend once went through a divorce toward the bitter final end of their living together stages. He lost his cool and hit her. She admitted to him 3 years later that is exactly what she was trying to make happen because she wanted a reason to get him out of the house. That she knew she was instigating it and started talking about his dead mother in very horrific, unflattering terms. He lost it, slapped her one. He was, of course, placed in jail, had to go through anger management training, was removed from the home, and she took it all in the divorce. That is an instrument of using violence to your advantage, even when you're the victim. And again, that's another aspect of domestic violence we just don't talk about. And there is a lot of different ways to express violence in a relationship. Dr. T and I were just talking before this about whether or not emotional abuse is a form of violence. And we may not see eye to eye on it exactly, but largely to me it's a matter of semantics. And with that in mind, I want to put up a comment here by one of our viewers, Matrix Q, who says it would be great if you could talk about mental abuse. I haven't been in any abusive relationships, but I've been bullied all my school life and beyond by pretty much exclusively women to agree that I'm scared of even getting close to a relationship with a woman to this day. I've had people beat me up as well, but that is nothing compared to the mental scars I've had to work through over the years. And there's more of this comment there. I think that's enough for us to go on. But this is a really valid point, Dr. T, is that we have, if I can get this darn thing to go down. Pardon me, folks, while I fumble with technology here. Here we go. But it's a good comment and worth bringing up, because I know that emotional abuse frequently leads to physical abuse in a relationship. And we often have this, what we were just discussing, this line of one person in the relationship pushing and pushing emotional abuse, being extremely abusive in almost every way you can imagine but physical. And the moment things gets physical, if it's the man that does it, then everything that she did before that is off the table. None of that matters anymore. All the focus goes on to the one incident of reaction. The fact of the matter is that this guy's right, that emotional abuse for some people can be far, far more damaging than physical abuse. What were your thoughts on that comment, Dr. T?
I tend to agree. I include emotional abuse in my definition of domestic violence. I mean, not every harsh word is abuse. You know, adults have arguments. We sometimes say things we don't mean or we regret. But what you're talking about when it goes to the abuse level, for me, and this is my definition. Others will disagree. There are, you know, feminist DV experts out there who will say, you know, even one instance of an unkind word is severe emotional abuse. But for me, it needs to be a persistent pattern of behavior over time. Okay? And as such, that's how it does the damage, right? Because if you're told over and over again what a loser you are, what a piece of shit you are, you can't do anything right, you make me miserable, when you're put continuously into no-win situations where no matter what you do, you're going to get beaten down, either verbally or physically, when you're living day to day with somebody who has unpredictable responses. You know, one day you checking your mail, your email could be okay while she's playing Candy Crush. The next day while she's playing Candy Crush, she wants you to sit there staring at her adoringly and not do anything else, even though she's not engaging with you. You know, gaslighting is a big issue. Is a very abusive tactic that can make somebody question his or her sanity. When you know somebody, you know, when you know she said something, you know she did something, and she denies it, she said it, or you didn't hear it correctly. I had a client who had to, he actually installed a series of nanny cams in his house because his wife had been threatening to make false allegations of DV, and he wanted to protect himself. And, you know, there had been an occurrence where he was, for several months, just constantly misplacing his car keys and his garage remote control door opener, and he always left them in his memory. He left them right by the kitchen door out to the carport, and he would go crazy looking for this stuff, you know, because he's going to be late for work, be late for a meeting. And after he had the nanny cams installed, he caught his wife on video taking the car keys and remote and putting them someplace else. And he would ask her, hey, have you seen my car keys? I've looked everywhere. I had them right by. I don't know what you do with your stuff. You really need to start being more responsible with where you put things. Knowing full freaking well she had hid them somewhere. Deliberately. To drive this guy crazy. So, yes, I think, and over time, like I said, it will induce a sense of learned helplessness, cause, if you have any self-esteem left from even being in a relationship with someone like this, it'll destroy it. It can cause health problems. I think emotional abuse is very serious.
For me, I mark time in personal life, but how everybody has those moments that there was everything before this event and everything after this event. I mark time between the moment I went from treating women like they were supposed to be pedestalized to treating them like human beings. And what I noticed in the pre-red pill days, before the days that I started recognizing that women put on their pants the same way I did and that they didn't deserve special deference, what I noticed in a lot of relationships was that a big form of the abuse was simple nagging. And it was the double standard that came with it. The you don't do this right, you don't do that right. Why do you hang out with him? What is it? Why are you interested in this or that? And the constant nitpicky nagging about aspects of life that was nobody's business but mine to begin with, and two, that the women, at least the ones that I was involved with at the time, would not have tolerated somebody standing over them saying, why are you doing this way, why are you doing that way? And that, I ended up finding, was the shared experience of a lot of men in relationships, that the biggest problem they had wasn't so much physical violence as it was this constant ongoing double standard of, I'm going to judge everything that both of us do. I'm going to put a value on it. I'm going to tell you where you're screwed up, but you better not tell me anything about myself. And I think that is a under-recognized but very, very serious form of abuse when it continues year after year in a relationship.
I think what you're talking about is living with double standards. She has one set of rules for herself and another set of rules for you. It's okay for her to criticize you, call you names, make you feel bad about choices you're making, television programs you like, but you're not allowed to treat her the same way. She's allowed to go out with ex-boyfriends and hang out. You're not allowed to have any female friends, period. If she has one set of rules for herself and another set of rules for you, that's not a good situation, and it's rife for the potential of abuse.
It's abuse in and of itself.
Yeah, it is.
Let's talk about yesterday for a moment. Dr. T was on a radio show out of I forget where, one of the major cities yesterday, iHeart radio program, and she was talking to a man and a woman about male domestic violence. And I tried to call into that thing and could not get through, but I thought it was a fascinating discussion. One, total kudos to Dr. T. She unsaddled the white knight a couple of times very deftly and left him going, I
felt a little bad for that afterwards. I think I hit him with my lance a little too hard on one occasion.
No, you could have hit him a lot harder. He's a real man. He can take a beating and take a licking and keep on ticking. But here's the deal that I found so fascinating about that, is that the female part of that man and woman team was totally on board with what you were saying. She was curious. She was insisting that this is something we really need to talk about. Let's explore this, because and she said, and I'm quoting her almost verbatim, it's not credible to talk about domestic violence unless you talk about female perpetrators and male victims too. And she seemed very genuine and on board and open-minded from the get-go, and he was Dudley Do-Right. Well, men are worse. And then Dr. T pointed out, well, no, that's not true. Here's what the evidence says. He goes, yeah, I get that, but men are worse. It was like the white knight was strong in that one. And sometimes I wonder if...
No, I had to use a feminist shaming tactic to jolt him out of it a little bit, at least for a little while.
And you did get him out of it for, I counted 13 seconds. He got out of denial. And then he got uncomfortable with reality, and he started getting back up on his horse, and you shot him down again. I think that's why she had the final words on that segment. I don't think Dudley knew what to say by the time that thing ended. But I did find it fascinating that here you are having a discussion with two blue pill people. This is people that don't understand the realm of things that we explore and talk about. But immediately the woman was like, yeah, that makes sense. It's logical. Let's talk about this. And the guy was, oh, no.
Oh, no. Yeah, well, yeah. You know, where it started is, you know, he talked in his radio voice. Am I talking to a person or a cardboard cutout? No offense. You're watching. Have me back sometime.
Oh, we will have that conversation up on my YouTube channel this evening, too, for those that want to enjoy it. It was fun.
But he said, so, you know, it came about because, of course, everybody's talking about Ray Rice and Janay Rice, and, of course, most mainstream media news outlets are completely ignoring the fact that Janay initiated the assaults and actually assaulted him a couple of times before, and it didn't. I saw the video and I couldn't tell from the angle, but it didn't really look like he took a punch at her. It looked like he just stuck his hand out and batted her down when she was charging at him, and I think she knocked herself out on the elevator railing, not from his punch. But anyway, so the guy started off saying, well, you know, of course, you know, there are male victims, but as we know, you know, women are the majority, and no, that's not true, and here's why. And he's like, well, but so, you know, why do women do that? I just think that sometimes men can be so frustrating. So that's when I think I might have been a little too harsh with, the gentleman's name was Mark Thompson. It was Mark Thompson and Elizabeth Espinosa's radio show. Anyway, now wait a minute. So you're saying that if a man is frustrating a woman, it's okay for the woman to haul off and slug him?
Which is exactly what he was saying. He didn't want to believe.
I called him on it, and I said that's victim blaming, because you know what? Are you going to, in the same breath, say if a woman is frustrating a man, it's okay for her to hit her? Because let's get real, women can be really frustrating, especially when they don't use logic and insist that their emotional perceptions are facts. But I digress. So you know that was the first issue, and he just he couldn't seem to grasp that Elizabeth did. And said, you know, no, it's not okay for either sex to hit anyone. And then he got hung up on size differential, you know, that old chestnut. But no, she got it. She got it. And they asked, you know, why is it acceptable in our society for women to hit men? And I went a little bit into that, but it's you know. Yeah, he was much more resistant to the idea than she was, which is, you know, and typically you would expect the woman to be more resistant, and so oftentimes they are, but not in this case.
Well, usually when they're ideological, but honestly, my experience, embarrassingly enough, embarrassing for the male species as it is, but my experience with people that are basically ambivalent or have no skin in the game or don't have an ideology going is that women are much more open to the idea that women too can be abusers than men are. Men have this white knight thing going that the first thing they do is exactly what that Mark guy did, is he reached for an excuse. But men can be so frustrating. Like, fuck you, man. What do you mean men can be so frustrating? Why? Because they're logical, because they want accountability, because they object to the way they're being treated in a relationship. Yeah, that stuff is really frustrating. What? They play pool with their buddies and go have a few beers or go fishing without permission. That is fishing itself. for an excuse. It is just looking for any reason why a woman may not be at fault. And this guy and guys like him do no service to women whatsoever with this.
What's really weird is that the two of them were making comments. I don't know if you caught this, where she's like, "Oh, gee, Mark, it sounds like you've been through that before." So it sounds like this guy himself has actually been in a relationship with an abusive woman, and he was still resistant to the idea.
Joe Biden syndrome.
Which is another really good topic, which is, you know, it's in my experience, I mean, some guys, when I start working with them, they're already there, they get it, they're living it, they have no question that what they're experiencing is abuse. But for a lot of guys who are in really pretty extreme abusive relationships, they have a really hard time admitting that they are being abused.
Yep, and a part of that is that they, on some level, interpret that as an admission of weakness or lack of masculinity. Ooh, look at you, you got beat up by your girlfriend, what kind of wuss. I mean, that kind of mentality still does run through a lot of men, unfortunately, and so we end up with a lot of silence from men that are getting slapped around and kicked around and beat up in relationship, and we end up with a lot of guys out there who may very well have that history, trying to compensate in their head and make excuses and avoid their own past and their own realities by making up a guys are frustrating thing. Of course, he may be thinking, well, of course she beat me. I was so frustrating.
Well, it doesn't help when society, when it comes to educating the public about domestic violence, portrays it as men are violent monsters and women are fragile, weak victims in every case. So, you know, this is why we need public awareness campaigns. But those, of course, are dominated by the usual suspects at Feminist Inc. And it is very frustrating. And what I would have to say to the men who feel a sense of shame or don't want to be perceived as weak is that, you know, you're not weak to admit, I've been harmed, I have been victimized, right? Because then you have a choice. You can decide, I don't want to be victimized any longer. But first you have to recognize it for what it is, and then you can work to removing yourself from that situation.
I agree with that entirely. I think another thing that's really important, and it's unfortunately the hardest thing for guys to get. Guys, she's a human being. No better, no worse than you. She has faults, some of which may be faults that are not good for you or anybody else. And you have a responsibility to yourself. I mean, we can talk a lot about looking for signs of abuse. They're actually, for somebody whose self-respect and the sense of identity is completely intact, you don't have to look. You know when somebody's fucked up. You know it instantly. The moment it comes out of their mouth, a warning flag comes up in your mind that says, at the first hint of a double standard, at the first hint of shaming from somebody or judgment from somebody that's unnecessary or trying to tell you what to do or challenging your masculinity because you're not performing in a way that suits them. You don't have to have a magnifying glass and an investigator's kit to find signs of abuse. But when your self-esteem, your self-respect, and your identity is intact, those things are glaring. And then the only thing that remains is your willingness to put up with them. And that does put the onus back on the victim. Is that nobody says it's your fault because somebody acts like a shit. It's certainly not. But if you're sitting there questioning, gee, is this abusive? It probably is. I mean, I can't imagine what would make me ask if something is abusive without there being a warning in there for me that I ought to be looking at. Anyways, and I don't want to harp on the victims about it, but the fact of the matter is that, in my opinion anyway, in the end, we're all volunteers, all of us. We have to make choices about what we're going to put up with, and it is difficult. And when you have children with somebody, it's even harder. Not saying it's easy, but it is simple. You're either being abused or you're not. And if you feel like you're being abused, if somebody is telling you, you know, if you were a real man, you'd give me this, come on. Who is it that you need to tell you that that's abusive and that's wrong? You know that it's wrong. Do something about it.
Yeah. Well, and so let's talk about that, doing something about it. Now, unfortunately, there are a great many mental health practitioners who will tell men that it is their responsibility and obligation to figure out ways not to trigger their wife or their girlfriend, and to be more patient and understanding of her feelings, and will essentially enable the ongoing abuse that is happening to them, and make them responsible for their girlfriend's abuse. This is complete bullshit, and if you're working with a therapist who is making excuses for your abuser and telling you that it's your job to find ways to prevent her abusing you, that therapist is an asshole. You should fire him or her and get yourself another one. Do some screening first, who would give you, the man, the same advice that he or she would give to a female victim of abuse, which is make a safety plan and get the fuck out of that relationship.
I hope you're listening, guys, because, again, what Dr. T just told you is that it does ultimately fall back on you. Your abuser is not going to set up your escape plan. Your abuser is out for your best interest. Your abuser is not going to shop for a therapist for you that will tell you the right thing to do in a situation when you're being abused. They'll do just the opposite every time. And frequently, as Dr. T just said, she's quite correct. Therapists are so blind, or as blind as Goodell. They're as blind as Michael Kimmel. They're as blind as any ideologue, because many of them are ideologues. You go through and research therapists in your area and see how many times in their descriptions you see the word feminist theory pop up. You'll see it over and over again. I guarantee it. Other people, you will go in to see them and say, well, my girlfriend bloodied my nose because she thought I smarted off to her. And they will turn that into something that you need to figure out. But it doesn't involve leaving. It involves compassion for her and understanding what might have motivated. And if your girlfriend went to the same therapist and said that she got a bloody nose from you, there would be, oh my God, we need to report this. We need to get him locked up. We need to get you an escape plan. Blah, da, 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 da. That's the way things are in the world. So you're pretty much stuck on your own in most cases when it comes to getting help. If you're in an abusive relationship, the only sensible thing to do is to get out of it. And if you choose to stay, for whatever reason, you're going to pay a price for that. That is also inevitable. Sad, but true.
And so will your children.
Yes, they will. And they do many times. And this is, again, what we were talking about in the beginning. Children watch what happens. I mean, this is two of the biggest myths about the DV industry, the lies that they peddle. And two of the most glaring factors that they overlook. One, you know who gets hurt the worst usually from domestic violence? Because, like, almost all domestic violence is not life-threatening. There's some that is, tiny, tiny fraction of it. Most of it is petty, childish slapping back and forth between men and women. Who gets harmed the most from that? Not missing it. It is not either one of the adults. The adults can be having makeup sex 15 minutes later, and the children are still sitting there terrified that their family is falling apart, that they're going to lose one of their parents, wondering why mommy hits daddy or daddy hits mommy, wondering if it's their fault, wondering if they can do anything to fix it, These are not supposed to be running through the mind of a child, but that's what's going through the minds of children that witness violence in the home. And it happens every time. Long after the supposed grown-ups have forgotten about it, it is gnawing away at the consciousness and the guts and the hearts of those little children. The other thing is that the domestic violence industry not only ignores the abuse, because witnessing abuse in a child is child abuse. I don't care what anybody says. That's abusing your children. You're slapping people around in front of your child. You're abusing them. You belong in jail. But the other thing is that these kids will grow up. Your son or daughter will grow up either to be beaten by somebody or to beat somebody in many, many cases. And so what you are doing is producing abusers. And that means the domestic violence industry, as it's practiced right now, is producing more abusers by only recognizing one class of victim, one class of perpetrator, ignoring half the problem, lying about half the problem, getting all of society to look the other way. As these children are abused and as males are abused by female perpetrators, we are creating a whole new generation of perpetrators. It's absolutely disgusting.
I think it might be helpful, because I'm sort of thinking of this video as an introductory one to this topic. Would it make sense if I went through, I jotted down a quick list of some of the most common abusive behaviors that men...
Yeah, let's do that as a closeout.
Okay.
We're nearly 45 minutes. Let's go ahead and do that, and I think that's a good way to wrap it up.
Okay, and if you want to chime in and talk about some of these briefly, we can certainly do that. Now, I make it binary. There's physical violence and there's emotional violence, and physical violence includes more than punches. Most women don't have, although they can, women can throw a wallop a mighty good punch, but there's also biting, hair pulling, scratching, kicking, throwing of objects, using objects to inflict damage like keys, remotes, books, the destruction of property. The destruction of property, and I mentioned this on the radio program yesterday, just do a YouTube search of girlfriend smashes boyfriend's Xbox. Threatening to harm the pets, and then emotional violence. There's isolating, cutting you off from your support system. Gaslighting, I addressed that earlier. Control freakery. Constant criticism, putting you into no-win situations, causing you to walk on eggshells. I think it was last week's episode, Paul mentioned that if you have to go through an intricate series of mental gymnastics just to ask, hey, can we go here this year instead of there this year for vacation, or anything. If your editor's going into overdrive trying to figure out, well, how can I ask this or say this so that I'm not going to make her angry? Probably in an abusive situation. Withholding of affection, the silent treatment, using emotional blackmail, like if you don't do what she wants, she's going to divorce you, she's going to break up with you, she's going to take the kids and you're never going to see them again, she's going to commit suicide, threatening to make false allegations of abuse to the police or any other kind of organization. If that happens, you are in serious danger and you need to create a safety plan and get out. To me, that's just as egregious as physical violence. You got to get out. Double standards, we talked about that earlier. Unpredictable responses, talked about that earlier. Harassment. I don't know how many guys I work with who they're at their job during the day and they're getting text, email, calls, getting harassed at work, getting harassed while you're out or away from the home. No privacy, where you're living under constant surveillance and she wants all of your passwords. And I have a client who couldn't even go into the bathroom. He made the mistake of taking his phone in there. It was in his back pocket, and his wife was pounding on the door. Who are you on the phone with? He's taking a dump. I mean, like if you can't go to the bathroom in peace, that's not good. Smear campaigns, oftentimes the smear campaigns will even begin before you leave, because they're already sowing the seeds to get people to believe you're the jerk and she's the little innocent snowflake martyr. And parental alienation. It often begins before you separate. The children have seen her undermine and devalue you from a very early age, which just makes it easier to alienate them completely once you divorce. So I think those are the most common ones. There are certainly others, but those, in my experience, are some of the most common, and the ones my clients and the folks who participate over at Shrink for Men certainly seem to experience.
I think it's an outstanding list. The one thing that I would add to that is, again, just a personal opinion. But if you're not prepared to have the same expectations for how you're treated from a woman that you would from any man, then you're not ready to be in a relationship. That's, again, just my personal opinion. But if you're going to start out with the idea that you've got a separate set of rules, that she can do certain things that men can't do because she's a woman, you're starting off on the wrong foot. And of course, it's a very scary step to move into the realm where you're going to have the standards you would have being treated by any other human being. But if you don't go into a relationship with those standards, you can't expect that to be respected. If you're not going to respect them, it's insane to expect anybody else to. That sounds like a good place to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for being here today. As always, had a nice crowd, lots of good comments. Could not get to all of them. I want to remind you that tomorrow night, I'd like you to join me for Manstream Media with Tom Golden, where we will be discussing the fact of male genital mutilation, and actually what a savage practice it is going on every day in this culture as though it's something normal. It'll be a discussion you don't want to miss, whether you agree or disagree. Please tune in for that and let your opinion be heard. In the meantime, if you are or think you might be in a relationship. Uh-oh, Dr. T is raising her finger.
I have one announcement.
Stop now.
I have one announcement and request that I'd like to make before we wrap up, and then you can close out. And yes, I provide individual counseling and coaching services. You can find me on shrinkformen.com.
Which I was going to say.
Yes. But as Paul mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast, October is Domestic Violence Month, and we would like, I'm going to, last year, for those of you who are new to Shrink for Men and A Voice for Men, every day last October I published an article in his own words that was written by a male victim of domestic violence. Men wrote about abusive wives, girlfriends, mothers, the whole spectrum, and I published one every day to help raise awareness of male victims of domestic violence. So I'm going to be doing that again this year. I will publish an announcement about it with the guidelines for the written submissions, hopefully by tomorrow. Started working on it already, you just have to finish it up. It will be cross-published on both Shrink for Men and A Voice for Men. So if you would like to share your story, please check either AVFM or Shrink for Men tomorrow. The requirements will be there. This year, in addition to written submissions, we are going to see if anybody would like to join us on a hangout. If you're better at talking than writing, or that's easier for you, then perhaps consider doing that. We can do it. Protect your anonymity. You don't have to use the video. You can just use audio. And also, I'm going to ask women to submit stories this year, not about female victims of domestic violence, although they are collateral in the sense of I work with sisters and mothers of men who've had their beloved family members ripped out of their lives by an abusive spouse or girlfriend. The new wives and partners of men who still have a crazy abusive ex who's wreaking havoc. So they won't be the majority, but I would like to include some of those because I think the way feminists run the disinformation campaigns now, they don't consider these collateral victims of domestic violence, which are the friends and family members. So I would like to get some submissions from some of the women in the audience who have those experiences as well. So that's it.
And Dr. T, that includes emotional abuse as much as physical or
That's
any
right.
other form, sexual abuse.
Yep.
Okay, so there you have it, guys. If you want your story to be told anonymously or otherwise, look for Dr. T's announcement at shrinkformen.com and avoiceformen.com for the guidelines. Also, if you're interested in appearing during the month of October in one of the Going Mental Hangouts to tell your story, whether it's under your real name or anonymously, please get in touch with us. Keep in mind a couple of things about Hangouts. High speed wired directly into modem, a must for Hangouts, and we need a little bit of notice if you're going to appear on camera, HD camera only, so that we can get one of these lower thirds like you see below us here made for the screen for you. We would very much like you to participate and tell your story on this program if you would like to, or as she said, you can appear anonymously. We can just do your voice and put an image up there, and that'll work just as well. But anyway, as I was saying, so rudely interrupted me. If you are or think you might be in an abusive relationship, please go check out shrinkformen.com. Read some of the hundreds of articles there, many of which have to do with men just like you, their experiences in life, and importantly, how they started moving on from those relationships and living better, more functional, happier lives, even if, God forbid, it didn't include a woman at all. Imagine that. Also, if you want to know about men's issues in general, men's rights issues in particular, stop by avoiceformen.com. And one more time, join us here tomorrow for Mainstream Media with myself and Tom Golding, talking about why do we introduce men in Western culture to life by sexually mutilating them. With that, I wish you all a good day, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.